wall with the fantastic painting behind you. Who did that painting?
So that painting is by an Iraqi-Canadian artist who's also a friend of mine called Nadine Faraj. She too also lives between Montreal and New York City. So we have a lot of things in common. And it's actually of an Egyptian feminist activist called Alia El-Mahdi, who became known during the year of the Egyptian Revolution because she posted a picture of herself naked in her family living room on her blog. And it generated so much outrage from revolutionaries and unrevolutionaries alike, that there was a regime attorney, pro-regime attorney, who took her to court and wanted to strip her of her citizenship for stripping her clothes, basically for stripping in her own home. And she had to leave Egypt and now lives in political asylum in Sweden. So she's there. She joined that topless protest group, Femin. And during one of their protests, she had written across her breasts, "There will be millions of us." And that's the message. There will be millions of us.
Love it. I love it. Well, okay. Did you get from Twitter how I said, I used to say, okay, I watched this Stephen Colbert years ago, and he was speaking to women and he said, ladies, you're going to have to be really brave. You're going to have to get your lady balls, your Thatchers. And I guffawed because I thought it was hilarious. And so I've always said lady balls and Thatchers ever since then. And then following you and more and more and more, you're so fearless. I started saying like my Monas because
I'm honored. Oh my God.
Yeah, because I don't, Thatchers is cute. Lady balls, I don't really want to describe a male anatomy to describe my courage. But yeah, my Monas, because you're so fierce. You're so fearless. So my number one question is, how were you always like this? How did you get to be like this?
Well, I mean, so first of all, I'm honored. Thank you. So I love that. And when I give, so before the pandemic, a lot of my work involved public speaking. So that's obviously been put on hold a bit. Zoom, continues. But I mention that because I would often be approached by young women or young queer people, and they would ask me a similar question, and I would always say to them, look, I didn't come out of my mother's womb yelling "fuck the patriarchy." That as much as I love that image, it took years and years. And I say that because it's really important to recognize that it doesn't happen overnight. The way that we now talk, for example, about activists and people who've been involved in any kind of revolutionary struggle, we emphasize more and more like the long years of work that went into it. It's not this one particular moment and then overnight, you become who you are. I am who I am and they became who they are because of years and years and years of work and standing up to fuckery of all kind. So this is like decades of standing up to patriarchal fuckery and saying, fuck this shit. I'm not putting up with this anymore. And, I talk about it in my books and my essays about, my upbringing. So being born in Egypt and then moving to London when I was 7. My parents are both medical doctors who got scholarships to move us to the UK. And I think one of my earliest lessons is watching my parents. First of all, they met as equals in medical school, and they went to London as equals because they both got government scholarships to go and get their PhDs. But in the middle of the 1970s, and this is now a lesson that I kind of see in retrospect and that so much has been built on. My mother was there in the UK studying for her PhD. She moved in 1974. And this is the height of second wave feminism. And most of my teachers were white women who were working outside the home. And they continuously asked me, what does your dad do that brought you to London? And, I didn't know what was happening at the time, but I would answer very proudly, both my parents are doctors and both my parents brought us here, because the assumption is, we just follow my dad wherever he goes. And in answering that, I think what I was also doing, not realizing it, of course, at the time, is that I was responding and answering back to what we call the racism of low expectations, that they had such low expectations of an Egyptian Muslim woman. They couldn't imagine that an Egyptian Muslim woman in 1975 and on was in London to get a PhD in medicine, even though they themselves were women who were working out the home. They could only imagine her as a wife and a mother who was following her husband and was taking care of the children. They couldn't add to that also a doctor who was getting her PhD. Yeah. So I think that built the kind of like the foundation of so much. My mother was a role model, my parents as role models, racism, low expectations of Muslim women, And then we moved to Saudi Arabia, and oh my God, it felt like someone turned the fucking light off because my life just turned upside down, and I was traumatized into feminism. So between those two experiences, fighting back against the racism of low expectations and being traumatized into feminism, this happened.
When you landed in Saudi, how old were you?
15.
I can't even imagine, like just when you were coming into yourself, what was that first year like? Did they prepare you?
No. I mean, it's difficult to be a 15-year-old girl anywhere. It's difficult to be a teenage girl anywhere, So the reverse culture shock that happened, it was awful. And I really, really did not have the emotional intelligence, kind of like weapons, nothing prepared me for Saudi Arabia. And very soon after we moved, so it was about maybe 3 weeks to 4 weeks after we moved, we went on Hajj, which is the 5th pillar of Islam. And we went to the holiest site for Muslims. My family is Muslim. And I was sexually assaulted twice during the pilgrimage. This is a month into arriving in Saudi Arabia. So it's like everything that could have it was a perfect storm of patriarchal fuckery. It truly was. And again, in retrospect now, because I couldn't synthesize this at the time, what I learned in Saudi Arabia is that there are very many different types of Islam. It's not the Islam that I was brought up with. My mother, who was this incredible doctor who was doing a PhD in London that I would boast about, suddenly in Saudi Arabia couldn't drive anywhere, had to depend on our dad to drive her everywhere, because back then women couldn't drive. I mean, now the law, quote unquote, has been changed, but the majority of women still can't drive. So, but she and my dad went there because they were like pioneering medical school. They were teaching at the medical school there and set up a lab to train medical microbiologists, which was their field. So she was still doing incredible stuff, but being curbed by this horrific, toxic, like on steroids patriarchy in Saudi Arabia. And I truly was traumatized into feminism. I fell into a deep depression, and it was feminism that saved my mind, literally, when I discovered feminist books and journals in my university library. Some renegade professor or librarian must have put them there, but I discovered feminists of my own background, like Egyptian feminist Nawal Saadawi, Moroccan feminist Fatima Mernissi, and that really was the lifeline for me.
Okay, I mean, to think that sexual assault is rampant at Hajj still, probably, right? It's just...
It really is. This is why in 2018, I started #MosqueMeToo, because I wanted to honor Tarana Burke for her incredible work that she's been doing, again, not overnight. Some people think that Me Too began in 2017, overnight, with a group of white actresses against Harvey Weinstein. It didn't. Yes, no. That was just them saying something Tarana Burke has been saying since 2006 and probably earlier. Yeah. And I wanted to acknowledge and honor what Tarana Burke was doing for survivors of sexual violence who are Black and women of color. And so, and I had heard that a young Pakistani woman who had also gone on pilgrimage was sexually assaulted in Mecca. And I wanted to show her support and solidarity. And I'd been writing about my own sexual assault during Hajj in my book, on TV interviews in Egypt, in English, in Arabic, all of that. So I started #MosqueMeToo because I wanted to create a space for other women of Muslim descent to talk about this incredible, horrific taboo, So, it's like, the kids who were sexually abused by priests. Yes. Many of them would say that it was made worse because they thought, who's going to believe us? This is a man of God. It was made worse because they couldn't, in their mind or their emotions, understand how, in a religious setting, they could be subjected to something so awful. So the same for me when I was 15. I couldn't speak about it for years. I didn't even tell my parents at the time what happened. I just burst into tears, froze, perfectly normal reaction to sexual assault. But it took me years to be able to talk about it. One assault was by a fellow pilgrim. He appeared to be a fellow pilgrim. The second assault was by a Saudi policeman. So people who say to me, why didn't you report it? Report it to who? Oh. When one of my predators was a policeman, Yeah. So it's a reminder that sexual assault is everywhere, is universal, including in sacred settings, which makes it especially taboo, which why I showed support for Sabika and I've been writing about it. And of course it happens every year, but very few people want to talk about it. But I know now, because Muslim women write to tell me that #MosqueMeToo has created a space for them to kind of step in, and if they want to share their stories.
Yeah. I remember when I moved here, because when you come as an expat, and you're an outsider in the UAE, you're just so scared of offending anyone. And I knew what I didn't know, and then I didn't know what I didn't know. But I was assaulted twice, like mildly, but by men in Kandora, and one man in a very short Kandora, which apparently means he's even more devout. I thought it meant that he was special and he didn't know how long his Kandora was. But I remember that I don't know, someone just touched my behind and I was wearing yoga pants going to see a woman. And I for a long time, I thought, well, I shouldn't be wearing yoga pants here. That's what I was thinking. I was thinking, and then when I think back, it's like, yeah, you're saying that what you wore put you in line for, and it's the same thing at a low level, but it's very,
it doesn't matter what you wear, and it doesn't matter where you are, because I was dressed for the first time in my life in hijab. The only thing you could see was my face and my hands.
Yeah.
And it was at the most sacred site for my religion. And just about every Muslim household around the world has a picture of that cubicle structure, the Kaaba, around which you circumnavigate when for the rituals of the pilgrimage. So it broke something so deep in me that this happened during pilgrimage, and in the first time that I was dressed that way, it took me years to be able to go back and deal with what happened to me. And #MostMeToo was kind of like my contribution to fighting back against it, because Me Too has to include all of us. It has to include Black women, it has to include disabled women, it has to include Muslim women, it has to include working class women. It has to be as inclusive as Tarana Burke always wanted it to be.
Yeah. Did you ever physically go back to Hajj?
So we went on Hajj 4 times. So I'm a Hajjamona 4 times. The first time that happened, the second, third, and fourth time, I was extremely, again, this is not to victim blame or anything, but I was extremely vigilant about everything, kind of like the way you said, I shouldn't wear yoga pants anymore. It made me, because, I was being sexually assaulted going to the market, sexually assaulted going to the super, sexually assaulted fucking everywhere, So I just became really, really, really aware of my body. I put like my handbag behind my back and all of this in just horrific ways that you must never. It's like what happens on social media when someone asks, as they almost do every week, how would your life be if men suddenly weren't on earth anymore, or if men just didn't exist for a day? And women were saying things like, I wouldn't, all of those things, hold keys in my hands as I go to my car. I would headphones on, my bag behind my ass, or protecting my ass, all of that, So I did go back on Hajj many times. I went 3 more times, Umrah, which is like the lesser pilgrimage. But being in Saudi Arabia, and I'm not saying that sexual assault is exclusive to Saudi Arabia, it happens everywhere. I've been sexually assaulted in other places, including Montreal, where I beat the fuck out of this guy, many years later. But being in Saudi Arabia, it was the first time I was sexually assaulted physically, because when I was 4, I was sexually assaulted visually, if there's a term for that, when a man exposed himself to me and my friend when we were 4 years old in Cairo. But in Saudi Arabia, it was this head-on collision with just how my body basically is just this walking thing that is just continuously being assaulted and groped at and grabbed at. This is why my years in Saudi Arabia was so fucking difficult.
You're not going to be retiring there.
I don't think I will ever get a visa to return, and I'm glad for that.
Not that you would be tempted. Okay, so I heard you. You reshared a video, but it was in the beginning of the pandemic, and you were pissed off because you got your period, first of all, because we're, when you're getting close, this is the thing I wasn't prepared for. The countdown, when you're getting like, oh my gosh, am I going to be menopausal? Like, it's going to be over. You want it to be over, right? You want this milestone. So first of all, I saw you make a video where you got your period, and you were pissed off, and then you said, check your privilege though, because there's like something I always thought in the first days of COVID was how much my friends who are Palestinian from other parts of the country, people whose parents and grandparents had to uproot themselves perhaps twice, those people were so much cooler about COVID. I mean, they were just more chill about it, right? And I said to my friend, who's Palestinian, who moved from here to Toronto. I said, do you think it's because you have perspective? And you were talking about this in the video. You were saying, like, can you just go into that a little bit? Like what you thought?
Yeah, absolutely. Because, when the first few lockdowns started being announced in, various, especially, so first of all, very few people were paying attention, obviously, when the pandemic began in China, because, oh, it's so far away. People really began to pay attention when it started affecting white people.
Yeah.
So this was when with Italy, with Italy and Lombardo and that, and then it started spreading in other kind of like white countries, and then once it hit the West, it's like, oh my God, panic alerts, because, it's now here we are, we have to pay attention now. Yeah. So when lockdowns were being announced, people were just, going upside down with, oh my God, I can't take it up. The first thing it reminded me of was the various curfews, in Egypt. I mean, I remember there was a curfew I've moved back and away from Egypt and returned many times. But I remember vividly the curfew that the regime imposed after the horrific Rabaa massacre in 2013, when Egyptian police and soldiers massacred up to almost 1,000 people, if not more, in the space of a few hours during broad daylight, when they were breaking up a sit-in in support of the Muslim Brotherhood president, Mohammed Morsi. And we were put under curfew in Egypt for like 3 or 4 months, and other curfews had been put into place during the early days of the revolution, but I wasn't in Egypt. I was in New York City at the time. So I remember the curfew, and I remember why the curfew was imposed, because of this horrific massacre. So hearing people going, oh my God, we can't leave. And then especially, the Americans were like, freedom, the freedom, the anti-vaxxer, anti-mask, fascist fucks, the freedom crowd, And I was like, this is fucking bullshit. Because there are curfews that have been imposed on people across the world throughout time immemorial, There are wars during which people had to shelter in place because it was dangerous. There are people right now where you're complaining about you have to stay at home. And staying at home right now is a privilege. So working from home and staying at home is a privilege because there are people out there, the so-called essential workers who are being treated like shit, who don't even have the privilege of staying at home because they have to keep your grocery store stocked, or in a country like my country of birth, Egypt, jam-packed into public transport to go to clean people's homes, to go to factories, to go to places where there is no social distance, and they're going to go home and take the pandemic and the virus to their family. So it's a fucking privilege to be in lockdown, to shelter in place, So that was the point of my video. And I realized at the time that I wanted an immediate way to talk to people. So I started Feminist Giant, Dispatches from the Pandemic. So I thought this is going to be my manifesto, when you do like the revolutionary radio station. So that became my Feminist Giant, medium of communication. So I recorded several dispatches. I think it was at least 9. And then I thought, okay, fuck it. I'm just going to take it all the way, and then started the newsletter so that I could communicate with my people, manifestos,
Yeah. Well, let alone the privilege of look at what happened in Egypt during COVID, like the hospital, being in a country where your hospital can handle it and did handle it, all your hospital system. Egypt, I mean, it was a night, it was a true nightmare.
It was a horrific nightmare. And Egypt is still a red zone, and people were dying because there was no oxygen. Doctors were dying because they didn't have sufficient PPE. People were being left outside hospitals. Doctors, there was one particular awful story where a doctor who died of COVID, so she died because she was helping patients. Her village refused to take her body, or her husband's village refused to bury her because they thought that the corpse would give them COVID. It was horrific. It was multiple layers of nightmare. Yeah. And there still isn't sufficient vaccinations in Egypt. Here we are now, and now, a year and a half into the pandemic, it's by no means over. And we're not going back to normal because fuck normal. And these fuckers who are refusing to take the vaccines in the United States and some in Canada. And I'm sitting there thinking, in Egypt, oh my God, if you tell people that there are vaccinations where they can come to your home, they say, just call this number and we'll come to your home and give you a vaccine. And people are saying no because of freedom. People in Egypt would just lose their mind. So that's what I tried to convey with that video, the levels of privilege that are undergirding what you are complaining about, just shut the fuck up, understand that you are living, with so much privilege, And this is a moment where we have to live as a community truly, because if you continue to be a vector for the pandemic, we're never going to get over this.
No. I thought when I put it in my newsletter, I don't know if you remember, but when I got my second shot, I said I want Sinopharm, which is the China. I just didn't want to mix the vaccines. I'm cautious about things, and I didn't want to mix them, and I wanted to make sure I had two. So the nurse from the Philippines said, "Oh, white people always want Pfizer."
I saw that.
I've noticed a lot of flexing about the Pfizer, you know, and then my friends whose family is back in Dominican said, like, to hear people talk about their preferred vaccine is, you know, unbelievable. The other thing that I thought was interesting during the pandemic in terms of perspective was everyone complaining about not being able to travel. And I live in the UAE where so many people come to work as domestic workers and laborers, and they go home once every 2 years maybe to see their kids have more kids. I was like, so I thought about that a lot because, you know, when you're tempted to pout, those are people who can't travel. And the people who don't have passports. I mean, come on.
Absolutely. Look, undocumented people, working class people, you know, so many people. Travel, again, is a privilege. And it was actually one of the main ways that this pandemic spread. It was from that privileged class who were, you know, going, you know, being tourists, traveling for pleasure and not traveling because of absolute necessity. That was one of the main vectors of this pandemic at the beginning, you know. So, you know, besides or alongside kind of like the carbon footprint, which I admit myself, I have not always been vigilant of. It was also this really, really privileged footprint of saying, I can travel, you know? And so many people can't. And like you said, so many people have to travel in order to survive, just for merely to survive, not for pleasure.
Yeah. Okay. So you just said recently that you got your period. You wrote an essay about Feminist Giant. You got it again. You were 2 months from.
Yeah. And this is 10 months. I had not had a period for 10 months.
Okay.
And this was after my second shot. Okay. So this now, you know, this kind of takes us also into, you know, the kind of the lack of medical information and lack of medical research that goes into seeing people who menstruate and how the vaccine affects us. Because now, I mean, I think there was an anthropologist, I think she was a bioanthropologist, Dr. Kate Clancy, when she posted about menstrual changes in her menstrual cycle and opened it up for discussion on Twitter. I think it was in April. So many people wrote back to her, you know, so cis women, trans men, non-binary people, you know, people who have ever menstruated, that she started a volunteer study where people can send in their experiences. And I didn't know about this at the time. I had seen, you know, various research saying how the vaccine could potentially be affecting your menstrual cycle. And because I hadn't had a period in months, I thought, oh, it was just, this applies to people who are still menstruating. Yeah. And then I got my AstraZeneca. My first shot was AstraZeneca and in April. And then my second shot was Pfizer, because here in Canada, they stopped the AstraZeneca, and then it was second shot Pfizer or Moderna. And 2 weeks after my Pfizer, I knew that Pfizer and AstraZeneca together would give me really, really tough side effects. Yes. And they were. It was much tougher after my second dose than my first dose. But, you know, I was prepared for the headache, the chills, the muscle and joint aches, all of that. And then 2 weeks into it, I got a heavy period and cramping, which I never got. Right. I've had a period since I was 11 and a half. I never cramped. Right. So I was like, what the actual fuck is happening? And that's when I went and Googled, you know, periods or like vaccine, COVID vaccine menstruation. Yeah. And I started learning about Dr. Kate Clancy, her experiences. I read Dr. Jen Gunter's essay, and I included a few other links in my essay for Feminist Giant. And it seems to be because they don't know for sure, but it seems to be because of inflammation that is the reaction that your body reacts that way to vaccines anyway. It's supposed to, and the lining of the womb is part of the body's immune system. So it could be that, or it could just be that during that run up to that point of menopause, you know, you do get a period sometimes. You know, it could be any of those. I'm monitoring it. I'm tracking it closely, and if because I'm still bleeding, so I got that period for about 6 or 7 days, and then it went away, and then it started again. And I've read about other people who menstruate who said that it continued for up to 2 weeks at least for them. So if it doesn't stop, I will be calling my OBGYN and, you know, seeing what's happening, because I know from research from previous times when I've had, like this on and off bleeding, that it's of concern when you're postmenopausal.
Yes.
If you're postmenopausal and you suddenly start to bleed, you have to go in. And I got a biopsy it was 2019, because I was bleeding, like, and this was like 3 months almost, or 2 months of non-stop bleeding, but not heavy bleeding. So I went to my OBGYN and she performed a biopsy and it came back clear.
Okay.
And I'm sharing all this information openly because this is exactly what we need to know, because there are concerns, but these are more for postmenopausal women of endometrial cancer or uterine cancer. So I got a biopsy in 2019 and I was cleared. So now it's a year and a half later, and I'm monitoring it closely. It could be the vaccine, could be perimenopause, we'll see.
And of course you can talk about it without being an anti-vaxxer or like riling anti-vaxxers, but want to say it to prove something. But whatever, you can do that. It's interesting. Like, I wonder if it's an actual period. Do you know what I mean? Like, you must wonder that as well. Like, is it actually a period, or are you in that year? Like, but you're going to have to go through another year to call it, right?
Yeah, I mean, see, that's what I'm wondering now. I'm like, do I go back? Like, do I start from, month one again? Oh my God, I was almost there.
Right.
It was like October. I was going to celebrate.
No, it's crazy. Okay, so when it comes to perimenopause and menopause, first of all, what's it been like for you? And how long do you think it's been going on? Did you know about it? Were you prepared?
So as feminist as I am, I had no fucking clue, because I thought, you know what? My period's suddenly going to stop and I'm going to be, menopause. Hello. So I was not paying attention. I have to be really, really honest here. I was not paying attention. And then I met Heather Carina. We've been mutuals on social media for years. And then I met them in Chicago when I was promoting the 7 Necessary Sins for Women and Girls. And they told me, oh, we're coming to your book launch or your book event in Chicago. I was like, yay. And we went out to dinner afterwards. And I knew that they were writing a book on perimenopause and menopause because they'd announced it on Twitter. And I said to them, my God, how long does this fucking thing last? And they said to me, 10 to 14 years. I was like, what? It was like one of those scenes from a film, where it kind of goes, and then you kind of like mentally rewind all the things. And I mentally rewound all the things. And I was like, that's why that happened. That's why that happened. That's why that happened. And I realized it really had been, up at least 10 years earlier when I began to notice various symptoms. So but in those early days, it wasn't, it was just various symptoms that I now recognize as perimenopause. But I have to say, this past year with the pandemic has been fucking kicking my ass. Oh my God. And I've been as honest about it as possible, because this is like the movement that has been building up over the past few years for menstruation, where removed the taboos and stop the shame around menstruation. I'm so glad, and this is one of the things I love about your newsletter too, that there are so many different conversations happening finally about perimenopause, but the conversations need to be more inclusive. And so I'm entering this conversation now as a woman of color, as a woman of Muslim descent, as a woman of Arab descent, all of those things, in the same way that I talk about being child-free by choice, as a woman of color and a woman of Muslim descent, because so many of those conversations are led by and made by and for white, cisgender, heterosexual women. So we have to expand. And that's why I've been very, very open about my perimenopause.
Right. Well, that's ironically, even though I'm white and I guess identify in those ways, that's why I got into it, just because I was like, this conversation is not at all inclusive. And that's sort of how I've always been in coverage. Like bringing myself in it, I wasn't making it inclusive. I was just like, I want to get into it because of various gaps I see, but that's one of them. It just seems like, there's a lot of like white women going like, oh my God, nightmare, which it's fine to talk about your experience, but again, the perspective is sometimes missing.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
What sort of things have you struggled with, would you say?
So once I started to really pay attention, I think I struggled with kind of embracing this as this stage of life. And this is one of the things that I loved about Heather's book. They say in their book, this is not a disease, so I'm not going to talk about it as I'm not going to list symptoms, because symptoms, are how we describe a disease. And I love that they talk about how this isn't something that should be placed solely in the hands of the so-called medical establishment or the medical system, because otherwise it will continue to be, medicalized and turned into a disease. So I think once I started to pay attention, and this is where the kind of the timing with the pandemic, and I've written about it and talked about it on social media. For me, it became a really useful kind of like metaphor for what we're going through with the pandemic, in that the pandemic is, I imagine us kind of like standing along a corridor where behind us is something that we've left behind. And there's all these conversations about going back to normal. I can't wait to go back to normal. I'm like, fuck normal. And we're never going to go back to normal. That normal is gone now. You have to let go of it. And what you have to do is start imagining how you're going to emerge, because this corridor now, you have to start facing forward. So you have to start planning for emerging from this corridor. And it's going to take a while. And honestly, the pandemic is what helped me kind of come to grips with this, to start imagining perimenopause as this emerging, as a transition, as leaving behind. I'm never going to go back to what Mona was. And I don't want to go back to what Mona was, because this is a perfectly natural stage of Mona's life. We all of us who have or have had a uterus are going to go through this stage. And we're never going back, just as with the pandemic. So fuck that normal. So what am I emerging to? And so I think yes, the hot flashes, yeah, I was like, oh my God, fuck. If I could channel the energy from these hot flashes, I would fucking, like, Jeff Bezos and Richard Branson and all these fucking billionaire shit boys, they have nothing on the energy that hot flashes give us. We could propel ourselves to Mars and back with the energy from hot flashes, So the hot flashes, my God. And then, and this is where I began to start also curating. And this is where you and Omi, Omishadi Burnley Scott with Black Girl's Guide to Surviving Menopause, and Heather's book, I began to curate things that weren't strictly medical, which helped me with things like, when I work out, joint pain. So hello, magnesium, vitamin B, all that kind of stuff. And then, paying attention to my nutrition, because your body does change, the digestion, metabolism, all of that, changes in my libido and my sex drive. And again, and kind of like resisting the temptation to go, oh my God, I'm broken. And instead, just because I talked to Heather about this when they were interviewing me for their book, and I talked to Omi about it when she was interviewing me for her podcast, to think of all those changes, including the changes in my sex drive and ways to emerge forward, as this is a transition. And this is now, it's a change, and you can fight the change all you want, but it's not going to stop the change. So how now are you going to emerge, Yeah. So I think the biggest challenge was just to sit there with myself and say, how am I emerging from this pandemic, and how am I emerging from this perimenopause? And that's why in my essay, Falling Apart Like a Feminist, I liken it to being, I imagine the metaphor of being in a car with the handbrake on and trying to drive. You're not going to get anywhere. You're just going to sit there and screech. Yeah. So the past year has been a lesson in releasing the handbrake. The handbrake for my perimenopause it was going to anyway for me to transition with my perimenopause, so my body, and with the pandemic. And it's one of the reasons I cut off my hair. I shaved off my hair because I did not want to emerge from this pandemic as if I'd been on vacation for 3 months. Mm-hmm. Mona looks exactly the same. I wanted to physically embody the change that I and all of us have gone through, and say, stay the fuck home, because help other people who are very vulnerable to this pandemic. But also to say, you know what? I love you, Mona, that brought me up to the stage, but I'm letting you go now. Thank you for bringing me here. I'm going to take it from here, and I'm going to work on emerging. We're now going to emerge to the next stage. So that's kind of like my poetic metaphor of perimenopause and pandemic.
Well, I dream of cutting my hair all the time, and I'm seeing more and more women do it. I feel like it and the gray-haired movement, although they seem superficial, I feel like they're sort of outgrowths of what women have been through in the last, Me Too and all that. Do you see the correlation, and also this age? Because when you talk about that, it's like you want to mark it, you want to shed, like you almost, my urge, I almost just want this hair off, like to start with new hair or something. I don't know how to explain it.
It's incredibly liberating because look, for 8 years I was fire red hair. This is how people recognize me. My friends, if we were running late, they would look for the red hair. So it was who I am, and for me, it marked another stage. It was my way of celebrating survival after Egyptian riot police beat me and sexually assaulted me, broke my arms, and I was taken incommunicado, blindfolded and interrogated, all of that. And I vowed to myself when both my arms were in casts in 2011, this was during the year of the revolution, but it was in November, not during the 18 days. I vowed to myself that I would celebrate surviving by dyeing my hair bright red and getting tattoos as my way of saying, fuck you, I survived, you didn't kill me, So the red hair meant a lot to me. It wasn't just letting go of pre-pandemic or pre-paying attention to perimenopause Mona. It was letting go of my marker of fuck you, I survived, you didn't kill me,
Yeah.
So I was like, this is really difficult. But it was also a way of celebrating another kind of survival and transition. And that was through perimenopause and the pandemic. And it was incredibly liberating. And, my hair's neon yellow now because I love color. And I also vowed that, when I'm vaccinated, I can get out a bit more, or when I merge further along, I got yellow hair last year as well for my birthday. And my birthday is tomorrow for 5 days, like born day and official birthday. So, but, in the in-betweens, I wear my buzzed gray hair, So once I'm done with this neon yellow hair for now, I might go to blue or purple, and then I'll buzz it all off and the gray comes through, and it's incredibly liberating. So yeah, I do see it. I see it with many other women as a way. It's like just shedding all of this fuckery and saying, here I am, I'm standing in my power. What does it mean to stand in your power?
I see it too in shoes. And if I had time, about 3 years ago, I was like, I want to write an article about the connection between footwear and Me Too. Because I feel that everyone's wearing trainers, and I don't think it's any accident. I went to an event in Abu Dhabi, and the Emirati women always have the Manolo Blahniks and the Jimmy Choos, and everyone was wearing trainers. And I was like, this means something. We're standing. We're like, it's not wearing shoes to please men, I think. And also we want to stand securely. I felt like there was something there. I never got it. There's a million articles that you want to write and you don't, but
yeah,
I don't know.
Well, I honestly think also, this pandemic. So yeah, we had, the Me Too and the various iterations, but I also think the global pandemics always usher in revolutions. They have to, because of there's so much, a pandemic forces you to pay attention to all the injustices. So last year we saw the incredible Black uprising, led by Black Lives Matter, anti-systemic, it was against systemic racism and police brutality and anti-Blackness. And this is what pandemics do. They trigger in you, they inspire in you revolutions on various levels. So personal revolutions, social revolutions, and political revolutions. And I'm convinced that over the next decade, and some revolutions happen quicker than others. I knew there would be a revolution because of the pandemic. I didn't realize it would be so quick as in last year, with the Black uprising, the Black-led uprising. But, the next decade will be full of revolutions. As we all come, as we emerge along that corridor, we will all be going through various revolutions, whatever, footwear, hair, body, all of them, because this is such a shake to the body politic, literally and metaphorically, figuratively, all of that, such a shake to the body politic of what the fuck brought us here. And how do we ensure that we move away from all the awful things that brought us here?
And have you noticed menopause is kind of a revolution, right? It's a personal revolution. It certainly is. But have you noticed in the UK when they're calling it menopause revolution, so far, they're very far ahead there in their conversation. So the government is looking at it and they've got it in schools and blah, blah. Does that bother you that they call it menopause revolution? Is that like okay wording, do you think?
Well, I mean, the thing, I'm really glad that they have the conversation. They've been having the conversation for a while now in the UK, but it's so white. It's so white.
It's so
I mean, even so white and cisgender and all of that, because even a newspaper like The Guardian, which is supposed to be kind of left wing, I go to their menopause section and I see I once took a screen grab of this, because all the essays and all the articles, but mostly the personal essays that they have, it's just a string of white cisgender women. I'm
Yeah.
like, are these the only people? Are these the only people truly who go through menopause? And, you
Right.
know, and I also saw the film, you know, the film that Davina McCall made, right? I'm glad the film was made. There were two women of color. There was the black woman who, Black women's menopause, I forget her.
Menopause whilst black, Karen
Thank
Turner.
you. Yes, exactly. Menopause While Black, the designer. And there was a doctor of South Asian descent who
Yeah.
talked about getting, you know, posters and public service announcements, you know, in Urdu to get to women. But I was like, you know, there were two voices, but two, really, honestly, in the UK, such a diverse country, all you could get me was two
Yeah.
women of color. So I'm glad they're having a conversation, but for fuck's sake, you know, have trans men, have non-binary people, and have people of color who are going through this. This is not white women's thing, you know?
There was a bank in the UK, UNB Bank, and they did a great I'm going to share it on social media again, because they did a great video to announce their workplace policy. And it was so inclusive. It was the most inclusive thing you've ever seen. Like, it was like brilliant. And so
Wonderful.
they did it. They had, it was amazing.
Oh, please share, because I love the videos you share, because I love that Age of Despair ad that you shared, and I love those all the ads that you find. So I'm going to look for it.
Well, for advertising, you can make fun of it, but I feel like it's so reflective of what's going on, right? Like, it's so like that Princess and Sexy one. And I know that, I know the Tena, the Age of Despair, the one where they were choosing a new word. I know Arabic has 12 words for everything. That was not a very commonly used term for menopause, I don't think, in Arabic, but it still is really,
it is quite common though. I mean, maybe in like younger generations now.
Younger, no, but
yeah, I remember it. I mean, like, I'm 53, and I remember it from, you know, when I was younger, that people were using that phrase.
Right. So how does that set you up to go through it? Like,
I don't know. Listen, when I was younger, I remember I would hear women around me, whether it was, you know, from family or when they were talking to their friends, they wouldn't even say the word for period. They would say X. Are you on your X? Did you get your X? And the word period itself, you know, was not uttered. And also Age of Despair. So I think it's really important to be honest about, and you'll find equivalents in other languages. This isn't specific to Arabic. It's not that Arabic is especially, you know, misogynist or you know, anti-ageist or I mean, like, ageist. Every language has that, because it's patriarchy.
Yeah.
Because patriarchy, you know, squeezes us through these linguistic hoops, you know. So I was really glad to see that ad, and that's why I shared it when you had it on Instagram. It's a wonderful ad.
Do you have any theories? A lot of people talk about menopausal rage. I wonder if you've had any particular experience with that, and if you know, you talk so much about anger and feeling comfortable with your anger in your book, and I'm certainly becoming more comfortable with that, and I think along with it comes using your voice. But what do you think of the connection between that rage women talk about, menopause, and the patriarchy and what we've been through? What's going on there, do you think?
Well, I think it depends on, you know, who's talking, because I think, so I've been angry for the longest time. I've been really angry this is not a new thing for me, you know?
Yeah.
And, you know, as I mentioned in my book as well, it's a privilege to go through life without being angry. You know, it's either because very little has happened that has made you angry, or you have had other ways to resolve whatever issue keeps so many of us angry. And that's why in the introduction to my book, I say, you know, white women who have just suddenly discovered their anger when Trump became president, where the fuck have you been? You know, because Black women have been angry forever, and they're vilified for their anger. You know, they're stereotyped as the angry Black woman. You know, feminists have been angry forever, and we're called feminazis and, you know, ball breakers and man haters because of our rage, you know. And I've been angry for a really long time. So it really depends on who you talk to and when their anger began. But I think what happens around or during perimenopause is, especially for women who have gone through life, women, and I'm cisgender women now here, yeah, because people who are going through perimenopause who do not have the privileges of cisgender women obviously do not go through this. So cisgender women for whom patriarchy worked, you know, either because they were conventionally beautiful, or they were, you know, they had lots of children and they were celebrated because of, you know, motherhood, or, you know, whatever the things that patriarchy socializes us into saying, yeah, I've got it made, even if you don't actually say it, but it's all the things that basically privilege you through life, including, proximity to the power of men and whatever, fathers, husbands, brothers, sons, all of that. Then you hit perimenopause and you are no longer going to have children, so that thing about motherhood and fertility is going to go. The way that patriarchy replaces the conventionally attractive with the even younger. So the way patriarchy privileges youth over aging, you begin, if you have for the longest time based your worth on what patriarchy told you your value came from, which is being young and conventionally attractive, and then suddenly you're like, oh my God, there's a younger brand coming along, and I'm getting older and older, and patriarchy socializes you to hate and fear aging. That becomes a moment of just saying, fuck this shit. I bought into a lie, and oh my God. And this is why you hear a lot of people saying that this is a moment when a lot of those cisgender women who had been so privileged sit there and do like a mental rewind, So my mental rewind was like, oh my God, now I know what happened with, one of the impacts or effects, when the so-called symptoms. So it wasn't so, oh, I need to go back there and claim my rage because I've been rageful forever. Right. But the women who were not raging, then they start to kind of take account, oh my God, all those things that I thought made me special, that rug is being pulled from under my feet now. Now what, And now it's like, okay, patriarchy, time for a reckoning, Right. So it's like, welcome, hello.
Yeah. There's an essay, there's a particular kind of essay, and I haven't seen it in months. And I'm so glad, because I saw it 4 months and I saw it all through last year, where you have a privileged woman, a cisgendered white woman in they start their essay with the anecdote of the time that they weren't seen. And then they felt invisible. And then, oh, this is my menopause and it was horrible. And it makes me crazy to read that, because I'm like, did you just make your self-worth the fact that you went places and people could, you got whatever you wanted? Like I've had friends like that. It was so beautiful that they could literally, like, I was at a hockey game with my young, beautiful friend once, and she said she was thirsty, and a man went and got her a bottle of water. And I was like,
there you go.
I'm also thirsty.
There you go.
But also but like also the assumption that because someone didn't notice you at a cash register or they didn't refill your coffee in a restaurant, that they were overlooking you because you're all of a sudden menopausal and not hot. That annoyed me too, because I've always worked in the service industry and there's a million reasons why you don't get taken care of sometimes. Someone's gossiping in the back, or like that essay. I never want to see that essay again. Did you read that essay? Do you know what I'm talking about?
I know exactly what you're talking about. And sometimes that essay would be, no, I don't get catcalled anymore.
Oh,
I'm like, fucking kidding me? Are you fucking kidding me?
That must be so hard. Must be really,
right. It's horrendous, isn't it? And then the liberation of being invisible and not being seen again. There's so much to unpack and so much wrong with that kind of essay. And so I much prefer the language that I'm seeing, in your newsletter, in Heather's book, in all the different people that Heather interviewed, the various ways that I write about this, about owning a power that was always there, but that was always discouraged. It's not about being invisible, it's about being powerful. And because we are powerful and we recognize that power, patriarchy now wants to punish us by saying, we are going to withdraw the one thing that made you valuable, and that is my gaze. I'm like, fuck you and fuck your gaze. Never wanted it, Never wanted to have babies. This uterus of mine, no room in the womb. That was never one of the ways that I was going to appeal to you, patriarchy. I am child-free by choice. Thank God that is leaving me now. Thank all the goddesses out there. Do you know what I mean? Yes. So it was like all the things that, and this is when we come into it's not being invisible, it's being powerful. And we are being punished for being powerful and for recognizing our power and for standing in that power by being told you are now invisible. I'm like, if that makes me invisible, then you better fucking be living in terror, because that means I can come with my invisibility and get you in the gut. Fear me.
Yes. Plus, you make your own reality, I feel, in a lot of ways. Now, that's not to override systemic racism and all the sorts of ways that people aren't seen. But I feel like that in certain ways, you can sort of make your own reality when you're making your way through the world. If you think people aren't paying attention to you, fine. That's
Well,
something.
I'm glad you brought up, racism and just how the systems and the structures are there to privilege just a few. Black women have been say forever that they are rendered invisible all the time, regardless of their age. Like it becomes like a skit in TV shows now, and on social media, Black women talk about this all the time. They will be at, a coffee shop counter or at a shop somewhere, and some white person, a woman or a man, will just walk right in front of them, straight to the counter. And the Black woman will say, hello, I'm here. Or they'll be walking down the street and some white person will walk right into them. So when someone writes this essay, and it's invariably a cisgender white woman, when she writes an essay saying, I feel invisible, hello, what are you saying? You are part of rendering Black women invisible for the longest time. So it now just becomes a reality to you because it's affecting you, but you are contributing to the systemic oppressions that render Black women invisible, disabled women invisible, trans women invisible, all of that. So this is why truly what is at the heart of this is privilege, and a privilege that patriarchy gave some, that I call crumbs. It threw them crumbs and they accepted the crumbs in return for a limited form of power. And I say in my book and all my essays, I don't want your fucking crumbs. I want the whole cake, and not even patriarchy's cake, my own cake. Thank you very much.
I'm still partway through your book because we spoke a little bit earlier, but I love it. And I love, there's just so much about it that I love. I cried a couple of times. I don't know why, just your way you talk about claiming yourself and the profanity I love. Can you explain why swearing is important? And okay.
Absolutely. So as you can tell from my speech, I swear, liberally and literally all the time. I think profanity is politically important. It is the verbal equivalent of civil disobedience, because we have to understand that underpinning words and concepts like decorum and civility and politeness and respectability is patriarchy. And it is the most powerful of that patriarchy, and it's usually, so in the United States, for example, it will be white cis men. So they are the ones, so it's like racists and misogynists who insist on policing our language when we're fighting back against their misogyny and their racism and their ableism, etc., etc. And so just consider the way that when a racist insists that we be polite, they're basically insisting that we recognize their power and continue to uphold their power. Or when a misogynist says, language, because I'm telling them to fuck off, they're insisting that I place their power and comfort above mine. And I'm like, I'm not here for your comfort. I'm here to make you uncomfortable. And so I said, fuck all of that, because truly civility is, and I think, again, a lot of white Americans especially began to understand just how harmful and toxic civility is during Trump. It took them that, for the rest of us, it was way before Trump, for Black people, Indigenous people, people of color, we understood how civility worked to tone police us and to limit our way of fighting back, all the ways at our disposal of fighting back. But then white people suddenly understood that in conversations about Donald Trump and his fascism and the white supremacy that fueled Donald Trump was always there in the US. He didn't invent it, and it continues, right now I'm talking to you now, there's a January 6th commission happening in Congress about, the insurrection. So they began to understand that when people started saying, we have to hear both sides, some people still don't understand, or you have to be civil. Don't call them racist. Can you imagine not calling a racist because you're going to upset the racist because you called them a racist? Are you fucking kidding me? What fucking upside down world is this? So I think, it's really, really important to tell people profanity. And I use Dr. Stella Nyanzi. She's one of my heroes. She's a feminist scholar from Uganda. And just by way of tying up this is why profanity is really, really important. An academic who I quote in my book has said that Stella Nyanzi, who has been imprisoned for offending the dictator of Uganda, so just for her words, she was put in prison. And an academic who has studied Stella and what Stella does has said that Stella Nyanzi represents a tradition of radical rudeness, this academic calls it, in Uganda. And that tradition began during colonial days when the Brits colonized Uganda. And they would tell the anti-colonial activists that they had to be polite and they had to be respectable in the ways that they fought to liberate their country from colonization. Can you imagine? So of course the anti-colonial activists were like, fuck you. That's what we think. And that's a tradition that Stella continues. And that's a tradition that I continue. And that is a tradition that tells patriarchy, fuck you, because I believe patriarchy is the oldest form of colonization. Oldest form of occupation. And that's why I also advocate violence and all this other stuff later on in my book. Yeah. But that's why profanity is so important to me.
I was cleaning, it was Eid break here last week, and I just took the opportunity to clean and get organized. And I found this book that I ordered when I was managing a features department, and I tangled with another editor from Britain. And because he sold me out in the news conference, something he could have easily said to me on the side, he threw me under a bus basically. And this wasn't like me, but I went up to him and I said, what was that all about? Like, we have a relationship, you could have. And he said, why are you being so aggressive? And instead, where I was then 7 years ago, instead of being like, fuck you, I'm not being aggressive, I'm calling you out. I apologized. And then I went and found some old ass book on Amazon. And the title is How to Be an Assertive, Not Aggressive Woman.
You see, this is all learning, though. This is all part of your process, yeah. Anne-Marie. You know, yeah. don't hate on Anne-Marie 7 years ago. Yeah. Tell Anne-Marie 7 years ago, I've got you now. I've got you. I recognize the fuckery of that moment. I recognize it. I'm here to claim you. And right now, Anne-Marie, 7 years later, thanks you. I've got it. Fuck him.
Fuck him. Oh, Mona, thank you so much. It's wonderful to talk to you. And yeah, where can people find you?
So I'm on social media. I live on social media, as you know, at Mona Eltahawy on Twitter and Instagram, and also Feminist Giant newsletter, which is it's going to turn 1 on September 1st. And thank you. Feminist Giant newsletter is free, and it will always be free. No paywall, no ads. But if you can pay, it helps to keep it free. And it's me and 2 paid interns, and it is a newsletter that I put all my writing and all my energy in, and I love it. So Feminist Giant.
It is fabulous.